Hello, I'm Dylan.
I'm Keon.
And this is Triple Play, that podcast that we came up with on a beach, because this month we watched the Indiana Jones trilogy. So that's Raiders, Temple of Doom, and Lost Crusade.
Written by Lawrence Kasdan, Willard Hoyk, Gloria Katz, and Jeffrey Boehm.
They're all directed by Steven Spielberg.
And released in 81, 84, and 89.
Finally, I got the easy job for once. Only had to say one name.
So classic 80s trilogy that was released basically throughout the 80s, just a 10-year span.
Yeah, and apparently always intended to be only a trilogy. Well,
they wanted to expand it into 5, and then George Lucas was like, nah, I don't want to expand it into 5 anymore.
Well, yeah.
I want to do the TV show with young Indiana Jones instead.
I mean, I read that George Lucas always wanted to do 3, and his company just kind of jumped the gun and was like, we're going to do 5. But George was like, yo, we still haven't even made 3 yet. Let's not jump the gun yet. And I think after the 3rd one, he was like, yeah, 3's fine. Trilogy is good. But then obviously in the 2000s, when Hollywood was like, hey, you know, we can make sequels to old movies and make tons of money, they made another one, so...
Yeah, well, a lot of the stuff in the 4th one was unused material from the first 3, but we'll eventually get there, I guess. Mm-hmm. Anyway, as for how many times I've seen these, I've seen Temple of Doom the most, I think. I've probably seen that one about 4 or 5 times. Raiders, probably 2 or 3, and this watching of the trilogy is only my 2nd time seeing Last Crusade.
I've seen them. I think I've seen Raiders the most. I've seen all of them maybe 2 or 3 times. This was my 3rd or 4th, depending. I mean, I honestly don't know the exact number of how many times I've seen them, but it's either 2 or 3. And then Raiders maybe 3 or 4.
I was surprised at how much I actually forgot from these, which made watching them more enjoyable than I thought it would.
Yeah, I remembered quite a bit of these, although I remembered them in different orders sometimes, like the book burning scene in Lost Crusade, I was like pretty sure happened in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then when it didn't happen, I was like, oh, I guess that's in Lost Crusade. So,
yeah.
A lot of my memory of these movies was like fragments, but also playing Lego Indiana Jones, my favorite of the Lego games. I remember playing it after watching Raiders of the Lost Ark the first time. And so that I learned the plot of the other 2 movies through that game. Anyway, that game's awesome, and I have a lot of nostalgia attached to the first Lego Indiana Jones game.
Wonder how they do the Lego removal of the heart.
I remember it being pretty comical, because those games are pretty comical. I was surprised, actually, watching these movies, how dark Temple of Doom was, and looking back on it, I'm just kind of impressed now that they even found a way to make a lighthearted Lego version of Temple of Doom.
Yeah, Temple of Doom had like a really weird tone, but we'll get there. First, we should probably start with how this franchise first started. George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were in Hawaii.
Well, so George apparently was super nervous about Star Wars, so he wanted to get away from all the premieres, so he's like, I'm going to go to Hawaii. So he went to Hawaii, and he called up Steven Spielberg and was like, hey, I've got an idea. Let's just come to Hawaii and meet with me, because I don't want to know anything about Star Wars right now.
This is apparently an idea that George Lucas had for like 10 or 15 years at this point, and I just made other movies instead.
Well, so Spielberg's like, okay, sure, I'll come down to Hawaii. So Spielberg went down to Hawaii.
I've read differing reports of this. Some say that he came down. Some say he was already there.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of uncertainty about a lot of this stuff in the making of these movies, actually.
Yeah, the point is that he got there somehow, and they were on a beach. And George Lucas was like, hey, so what are you going to do next? And Spielberg was like, well, I want to go back to Cubby Broccoli and be like, hey, will you let me direct a James Bond movie now? And then George was like, well, I've got something better than Bond that you could do. Spielberg's like, color me intrigued.
Color me purple? Okay, no. No.
B-.
He's like, so it's called Indiana Smith? And Spielberg's, no, it's going to be called Indiana Jones.
Except they didn't make that change until they got to the scripting stage.
Later.
But so later. The original pitch was like, George Lucas again wanting to basically rip off his childhood.
It's called inspiration. It's also called just stealing things from other movies and putting them in your own movie.
Yeah, like Star Wars did.
Okay, most movies do that. I really don't fault anyone for stealing things directly, because that's what most people do when they make things. Just steal things from a bunch of different other things and put them into one thing.
It's called an homage. Anyway, so George is like, I want to do like action-adventure serials now. We already did the Flash Gordon-style serial. Now we want to do the action-adventure. And Spielberg's like, wow, how could I have totally guessed that's what you were going to say? No, he doesn't actually say that.
Spielberg was like, all right, I guess I'll do it, considering they're never going to let me work on James Bond, probably.
Well, Spielberg, at the time, apparently was working on this other movie called 1941, which apparently totally just sucked and just didn't make any money and completely bombed critically and commercially. And like the fact that he had made that movie was part of the reason why no studios wanted to take Indiana Jones, because one of the hard like things in the contract was that Steven Spielberg had to direct and nobody else. And because he had just made this huge movie for quite a bit of money that it just completely bombed, studios didn't have a lot of trust in him, because this Spielberg was still kind of an up and coming as a director in this time. So
yeah, well, that's part of the reason why later on they hired what's his face, Howard Kazanjian or whatever, to control the budget. Well, because they had a $20 million budget for the first one, which we'll get to, I guess, in a minute. And they're like, yeah, we need someone to make sure the movie comes out on time and on budget. So yeah.
Well, so the first one, once Lucas explained, like, hey, it's going to be about this archaeologist who's, like, fallen from grace, and now he's basically a grave robber. He's going to be a really tough guy.
And he has these two sides. He's an archaeologist, and he's also an adventurer. Spielberg is like, all right, we're going to add two more sides, a playboy and an alcoholic. And Lucas is like, no, we're not going to add those two other sides. So for once, George Lucas actually reining things in and being correct.
Amazingly. Amazingly. I found a transcript of like one of the story meetings they had, because they recorded it, and I'm sure the audio exists and is really garbage because it's 1981. But the transcript was pretty interesting. I didn't read all of it because it's like 1 billion pages long, because they worked basically on the story continuously for a 3-day span.
Yeah.
Lawrence, they called in Lawrence Kasdan, who had just written Empire Strikes Back for Lucas and for Fox, obviously, because they were making episode 5. And they were like, yeah, we've got a good working relationship with him. Let's call him in to write this movie. And so him, Lucas, and Spielberg kind of worked out the story for Raiders of the Lost Ark over a 3-day period.
Yeah, and the first one has probably the best dialogue of the three. It's not my favorite of the three. Temple of Doom is my favorite, but you know, I guess this trio contributed to like the actual good dialogue in Raiders.
Well, I mean, Lawrence Kasdan's a pretty good screenwriter, in my opinion. I mean, Empire Strikes Back is obviously, I think, the best script for sure in the Star Wars franchise.
Only what you take with you.
And yeah, so they
came up with a giant script.
Yeah, a really long script. Also, they named Indiana after Lucas's dog. Apparently, Lucas's dog was named Indiana at the time, so that's where they took the name Indiana
from. And they
from.
incorporated that into the third one, obviously.
Spielberg was the one who came up with the name Jones instead of Smith, because he was like, Smith sounds dumb. Indiana Smith, not cool. Indiana Jones, very cool.
He's also gone on record as saying it would evoke this other character whose last name was Smith, like nobody knows about, but he's like, no, everyone's gonna get that it's the same. It's based on this character. I had no idea who the character was.
Also,
Nevada Smith or something like that. Yeah.
Reading the pieces I read of the story meeting were interesting, because George was saying how they wanted to plot out the movie like multiple smaller serials, and they were debating whether or not they should do it as like, if they should do it as 5 mini serials or 10, and then that kind of set the whole structure of the movie. They would have these 5 mini cliffhangers throughout the movie, and I was like thinking about it, I was like, oh yeah, that's actually, like, thinking back on it, like, yeah, that actually makes sense. Like the first movie, the first
one's obvious.
The first one's obvious.
First 15 minutes are like a different story.
Yes, right after Peru. And then throughout the story, there's other like small little cliffhangers, like the fire in Marion's bar is like the next one, and then so on and so forth throughout the rest of the movie. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And that's why the movie feels like it's so fast paced too, is because they're constantly basically moving to smaller mini stories throughout the entire movie.
Yeah, and that's where I think the third one, I read that and I was like, all right, I guess the third one was trying to recreate that and just totally failed at certain points. But I was trying to think of what the cliffhangers were, but I couldn't think of what any of them were except for the first one. I guess the fire is another one. But yeah, I couldn't think of any other ones.
Probably the fight on the plane would be one of them, but the chase, the truck chase,
I guess.
So, yeah, so they came up with a story. There was a lot of things in the first one. There was a whole section that was set in Shanghai,
which made it into the second one. A lot of the stuff that they had to cut from the first one because it was either too expensive or they just didn't have the time or way to incorporate it into the story was eventually used on Temple of Doom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the whole sequence in Shanghai was like, Indy was gonna the staff of Ra was gonna be the headpiece was actually gonna be in two pieces, and he was gonna have to go to Shanghai to get the second piece, and there was gonna be like a chase along the Great Wall, and
there's gonna be a raft falling out of a plane, which happened in the second one as well.
Hiding behind the gong in the club was also gonna be in the Shanghai sequence. That made it into the second one
weirdly,
as well.
Another weird one that I found was that originally one of the Nazi characters was going to like be really trigger happy and start firing the machine gun at Indy and like laughing when he does it, and then that was used in the second one with the guy's son.
Mm-hmm. Yikes. So they basically said, okay, we're going to make this movie for $20 million. And
this is when they got Howard Kazanjian on board and like make sure this movie stays $20 million. Or well, because apparently I don't really know too much about Howard Kazanjian, but apparently he had more experience with lower budget movies and just getting movies released properly.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, all right, help us.
Well, they had a difficult time also finding a studio to distribute the film because George Lucas was shopping the film around, and basically his terms were, we're making the movie, you're just putting up the money, and we're keeping all sequel and character rights, and you can like just release the movie and take some of the profits. And also Steven Spielberg has to direct this movie, which, I mean, is a crazy deal for a lot of reasons, not the least of which apparently the studios were upset with how the contract Lucas was shopping around to find profits. Which
20 million was like a lot back then.
Yeah, 20 million was a lot of money.
It sounds like I guess a mid-tier amount right now, but like it was actually a lot back then.
And Steven Spielberg, like I said,
like a lot now too, actually,
was coming off of a big flop of a movie, 1941. And also, you have to consider that the only credits George Lucas had to his name at this point was American Graffiti, the first Star Wars, and Empire Strikes Back in a producer capacity only.
Don't forget about THX
1138.
Yeah, no.
I mean, I guess that too. So it was a big pill to swallow, I think, for the studios. They did eventually find, I think Paramount, right, was the one who picked it up. They're like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, they incorporated the Paramount logo into the intro because the Paramount logo is a mountain, and they just transitioned that into the first shot of the movie.
Yeah. So that's how they get the money put up for it.
Casting, well, first they wanted, I guess in a classic George Lucas movie, like, we gotta get an unknown new actor to play Indiana Jones.
And Spielberg was like, how about no?
Well, I almost got Tom Selleck.
Well, so Tom Selleck wasn't well known. The thing was, Tom Selleck was a complete unknown when they wanted to cast him for this movie, and because his contract, or partially because his contract, they offered him a contract for Raiders of the Lost Ark. His contract for Magnum P.I. got picked up. So, and he had to turn down Raiders because he's like, I want to do Magnum P.I. And they apparently only replaced him like a couple weeks before they started filming. And they were like desperate, and Spielberg was like, well, there's always Harrison Ford, who Spielberg had apparently been pushing for since they first like wrote the script. But
George Lucas was like, I don't want Harrison Ford to be that guy that I put in all my movies.
Yeah, like we talked about with Insidious, there are some director, actor, composer
James
combos.
Wan and
Lee Wannell.
Not Lee Wannell, whatever.
James Wan and
I forgot his name.
Yeah, I forgot his name too.
the main character of Insidious and
1 and
Insidious
2.
2.
Yeah, so there's like some actor-director combos like that who like always work together.
They got John Williams, so that's a typical combo.
Yeah, I think George Lucas specifically referred to like Marlon Brando and Martin Scorsese always working together. So, but yeah, in the end, Spielberg won out. Was like, yeah, we're gonna get Harrison Ford, and
Yeah, and now Harrison Ford is just that guy that George Lucas is known for putting in movies based on Star Wars, this trilogy, and American Graffiti.
I mean, but I think he did a pretty good job in this trilogy.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, he did. Be kind of weird to imagine Indiana Jones without Harrison Ford. Although I guess, you know, if things had worked out differently, it'd be, wow, really hard to imagine Indiana Jones without Tom Selleck.
Belloc was cast based on like kind of an open casting call. Apparently, he hadn't done like an American movie or a French accent before in an American movie. Spielberg started to panic when they had already cast him, and he was like on the train over. So he had to call out Spielberg when he got there, and was like, "Yes, I can do a French accent."
They almost got Danny DeVito to play Sala.
Oh yes, Spielberg offered the role of Sala to Danny DeVito, and apparently DeVito wanted to do it, but he had another commitment, so he wasn't able to do it. So they got John Rhys Davies. Apparently,
another famous name.
Yeah, I mean it is. When you realize that he played Gimli in Lord of the Rings, I was like, where do I know that man from? It's Lord of the Rings. And also he voiced Aladdin's father in Aladdin 3. Kasim. But apparently in the script, Sala was written as like a 5'3", thin, kind of sneaky dude, and John Rhys Davies was like, what do you want me to do, lose weight? And Spielberg's like, no, I want you to play it completely differently to how it's written in the script. I want you to play it like that other role you had in that other movie. And he's like, yes, I can do it. So that worked out well. Marion didn't really have an interesting story about
No, those were basically the only
cast.
interesting casting stories for this one, at least.
I know that
They just liked her in some other movies that she had done.
They liked her in another movie, and Spielberg was like, we should get her. And George was
Animal
like,
House, but it was that and a couple other movies.
And so they got
They got her.
And so that kind of assembled the
Principal cast.
the principal cast, yeah. And so they started filming in... Where did they
They
start?
filmed a lot. They filmed a lot of locations. I don't know where they started and where they
I think they
ended,
started
but
in Tunisia.
They started
Same
in
place
Tunisia.
that they
Same-
filmed Star Wars.
like, hey, remember that desert we made Star Wars in? Yeah, we can go use that desert again.
A lot of the crew on Raiders of the Lost Ark was apparently a lot of the same crew who worked on Star Wars. So a lot of them were familiar with the location and the special challenges it posed, I suppose, like the overwhelming heat.
Speaking of a lot of the people who worked on Star Wars, John Williams is back doing the music. And the score in this, I forgot how similar it sounded to Star Wars.
I think only Raiders really sounds a lot like Star Wars. Temple and Crusade to me sound pretty different from Star Wars.
I kind of zoned out the music in Temple and Crusade.
Crusade is actually my favorite score of the three. Just because of the fun little Henry Jones Sr. motif that plays a lot that I really like. I think it's better than the other two. The score for Raiders actually gets nominated for the Academy Award for Best Score, but it loses to Vangelis' score for Chariots of Fire.
I don't know what that is.
You would know the Chariots of Fire song if you heard it, I guarantee it.
I don't know about that. There's a lot of songs that I don't know. Anyway, they also filmed in a studio in England.
Mm-hmm. And the Peru scenes were filmed, I don't remember where.
Yeah, I don't remember where either.
On location somewhere, in a jungle, somewhere. There were interesting anecdotes about filming on the set, especially with the snakes. Apparently Spielberg was a big proponent of using like practical effects, and originally they were going to use 500 or so snakes and then just a bunch of mechanical ones for the ones in the distance, but Spielberg like filmed it and looked at it on film, was like, no, this isn't going to do. So they got like 6,000 snakes to fill the Well of Souls. Poor snakes.
Yeah, there's a lot of stories. I don't know how true these are, but there are a lot of stories out there about like the unethical treatment of the snakes, like people just stepping on them, killing them, whatever. And not giving them any food or anything. Snakes can go like forever without eating, but yeah.
I heard one about a crew member who like took a snake and was like, I mean, what's the matter if I just take the snake? He's just gonna die on set anyway. And he like put it in the glove box of his car, and then he forgot about it for a week or a couple weeks until he was driving like, I can't remember if it was his mom or his mother-in-law. He was driving them around, and they like opened the glove box, and there was the snake. Surprise!
Apparently, some of the snakes killed each other. Cobra killed a python.
Apparently, Harrison Ford doesn't really care about snakes. Snakes just don't faze him apparently at all. Unlike Indiana Jones, who's petrified of snakes.
Well, I mean, as much as it might be hard to believe, Indiana Jones and Harrison Ford aren't the same person.
Yeah, but sometimes they'll write like things about the character into the.
Yeah, I read Ford was really involved with like creating the Indiana Jones character, which is good, I guess. Shows that he actually cared about the movies and wasn't just another job. One thing that he was concerned about that I read was he was talking with Lucas like, hey, isn't this character pretty similar to Han Solo? Like, I don't really want to play like the same guy again. Lucas was like, no, Han Solo is more of a younger, more upbeat hero. Indiana Jones is older and more clever, cunning, and experienced. And both I and Harrison Ford were like, yeah, I don't really know about that.
Apparently, they were like hesitant to offer it to Harrison Ford as well because they weren't sure Ford was going to go for a 3-picture deal because Lucas, this was my favorite story about this. George Lucas told Spielberg, okay, if you're going to do this, we're going to make 3 movies because I've got 3 stories planned out. And then Spielberg was like, George didn't have 3 stories planned out and we had to make the other 2 up. But yeah, so Harrison Ford actually signed a 3-picture contract when he signed for Raiders of the Lost Ark, which means that it was more likely they're going to make the other 2 films because otherwise they'd have to break contract with Harrison Ford, and that would have maybe cost them money depending on what kind of clause they wrote into the contract.
And probably cost them a good relationship with Harrison Ford.
Yeah, they were surprised that Ford signed on for 3 movies, but he said as soon as he read the script, he knew he would sign on for 3 movies. So
yeah.
Pretty interesting, I think. Apparently, I also found out that George Lucas worked second unit director, so he basically just got some random location shots that apparently made it into the movie. He like claimed responsibility for a couple of shots in the movie, and I was like,
Yeah, I read that a lot of the on-location stuff, he just showed up and he was like, yeah, it looks good, made some like outlandish remark, and he's like, this is what you gotta do, and then just left. And they're like, yeah, we're not doing that.
Apparently he fell victim to the heat. And
I learned his lesson on Star Wars. Come on, man.
Had to stay in the tent.
I'm sure that was just an excuse to just
not do anything.
No, I don't know. I really don't know. It is probably extremely hot, so,
I mean, it was extremely hot. They were like all sweating. All the actors were sweating.
Yeah, so they hired like 600 extras, Tunisian extras, to play the site excavators. And they complained about the conditions and like the amount of water they were given.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna have a bunch of people play people digging in the desert, in the actual desert, you should probably provide them with water to help them survive.
Anyway, as it turns out, Tunisia is a lot more cooperative than India in like filming movies in their country.
Oh boy.
Well, filming American movies, because India is like known to be the highest, to produce like the most movies per year.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that in a second. But yeah, so Raiders
came out, success.
It was a pretty big success, obviously. Spielberg, I read something interesting when Spielberg was talking about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. He was talking about how he tries to approach directing all of his movies like a new director. Like, he tries to direct each of his movies without the style of his previous movies, so he tries to make them all feel distinct, so he tries to direct them in the way that best suits the movies. So for Indiana Jones, he was like, yeah, we're trying really to go to like replicate the 30s visuals, the 30s action serial visuals. So like, my DP, my director of photography, had to like really work at getting all these lighting effects and film effects to make it look like a 30s movie. And then because I have a different director of photography for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I had to show him the first 3 movies and be like, okay, I need you to replicate this style because these things are like, we're trying to make them a product of a different era than what they were made in almost.
Well, I've only watched Crystal Skull once, but I do remember thinking it looked a lot more modern than the other three.
Yeah, because I think Spielberg also said, like, yeah, we wanted to replicate the first three movies, but also because Crystal Skull is set 20 years later in the 50s, like, we were able to change some of the things up to kind of emulate a different era almost.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting, though, that Spielberg was like, yeah, I tried to direct all my movies, like, without putting, the quote-unquote Spielberg stamp on it, because, a lot of directors have stylistic things that are consistent throughout the movies, like Wes Anderson. He's always super symmetric about everything, and he's super specific
there's
about
a Spielberg
symmetry.
stamp, just the over-sentimentality of it. The soundtracks, well, a lot of them are by John Williams, and add to that, like, sentimental feel.
I don't know, like, but Jurassic Park and Indiana Jones, even, like, if you looked at those two movies, you wouldn't necessarily think they're by the same director.
Yeah.
I mean, because some directors have,
Jurassic Park is based on a Michael Crichton book, so...
Yeah, but still, like, looking at the visuals and the pacing, like, you wouldn't think, you wouldn't look at it and be like, yeah, it's the same person, if you didn't know that they were both Steven Spielberg.
I don't know. I really don't know.
It's like some directors have, like, really obvious visual stamps, like Guy Ritchie. Every one of Guy Ritchie's movies are, like, really fast-paced with lots of rapid cuts and a lot of camera movement. And I think it's really obvious when you're watching a Guy Ritchie movie that it's a Guy Ritchie movie.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, they made the second one.
Apparently, this was interesting to me that both George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were in, like, a really bad place when they started working on Temple of Doom. Like, George Lucas had just gone through his divorce, and Steven Spielberg broke up with his longtime girlfriend, and because of that, they were, like, really angry and mad and sad, and they wanted to just make a really, really dark movie because they just hated everything. So they were like, Temple of Doom is going to be really dark. It's just going to be about a cult that kills people, and Indy's just going to show up, and he's going to save some kids, but they're going to be using kids for labor, not adults, kids. And apparently...
The first title of the movie was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Death. And, like we mentioned before, George Lucas was like, don't worry, I got these 3 movies planned out. Don't worry, guys. Turns out he had nothing planned out. And he came up with, I think I didn't read this specifically. I think one of the ideas behind Temple of Doom was make it pretty dissimilar from Raiders of the Lost Ark, because, Raiders of the Lost Ark, there's a lot of outdoor scenes, a lot of desert scenes as well. There's Temple of Doom, and a lot of scenes like in broad daylight. Temple of Doom is like, it's more dark visually. It's in a jungle, and it's also in a temple.
Yeah.
So yeah, I forgot why I brought that up, but there was a because to that, or there was like more to that. But I'll think
Temple's definitely different from Raiders and Crusade. It's kind of bookended by Raiders and Crusade, which I think are pretty similar in style.
They're just pretty similar.
Apparently, they asked Lawrence Kasdan to come back to write Temple of Doom, and he took one look at George Lucas's story treatment and said, "This is too dark for me. There's just nothing nice about this. There's nothing nice about anything involved in this script, and I'm just not going to write it for you." And so George was like, crap, who are we going to call to write this movie? And so he called up the 2 people he had write American Graffiti like 10 years before. And so they were like, yeah, we'll write it for you. And apparently, George really wanted Spielberg to direct again, but Spielberg was like working on a lot of other projects. And he was like, yo guys, if you don't get the script done like real fast, Spielberg's going to be busy with something else, because Spielberg was like already tentatively not down with doing another one. And they like put together the script in like 6 weeks.
Well, they used a lot of stuff that couldn't be used in the first one. Mm-hmm. I guess both because it was cool and something that should be done, and also because they need to put stuff in the movie. But Lucas came up with the idea of it being set in India, and the Sankara stones or whatever they were called.
The Sankara stones. He's like, yeah, we wanted to go for something different than Ark, because like the Ark of the Covenant was like, that's something that everybody knows about. Basically everybody knows about. But we also wanted to do something mystical but different, so we found this kind of obscure thing, and so we decided to use that.
And we needed to create a cult.
Yeah,
so they created the Lucas and the two writers, Willard Hoyk and Gloria Katz, were like, all right, we need to create a really evil cult. So they decided to combine a lot of different cult/evil worshipping groups around the world, like Satanists,
The Aztecs.
the actual cult of Kali or whatever.
Yeah, they took, I think I read that they took their base inspiration for the Thuggies from a Rudyard Kipling poem. And
Not surprised, since
yeah.
Rudyard Kipling is known for being like a massive racist.
And so they took like the base idea of this cult in India that does evil things from there, and then they just started adding other things into the pot. Like we said,
Like the voodoo and human sacrifice.
The voodoo, the human sacrifice from the Aztecs. And they just tried to make it as evil a cult as possible, which is also why they used kids for labor. There was apparently also a brief idea to have like a haunted house type story with kids involved, but Spielberg hard vetoed that real fast.
So yeah, they assembled their cast again. Obviously, Harrison Ford was back.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new leading lady, Willie.
Yeah, Willie.
Extremely actually not that controversial, just an extremely disliked character.
Yeah, Kate Capshaw.
Kate Capshaw. I don't think Kate Capshaw was known for doing much. I think she was a TV actress, but not really that famous.
She was a TV actress, and she's actually married to Steven Spielberg now.
Oh, I didn't know
they got married in 91, and so there's a rumor, unconfirmed, I might stress here, this is unconfirmed, but some people believe that she got the role because Spielberg and Capshaw started dating around the time that Temple of Doom entered production.
I mean, it seems likely. It's not that far-fetched of a rumor. Obviously, we don't know if it's true or not, but it seems pretty possible.
Yeah, it's possible.
I don't think she was a bad actress. I think most of the problems with that character comes from the writing of the character itself.
Yeah, but I think she has good character growth over the course of the movie. I think by the end of the movie, she's obviously grown as a character.
I mean, a little bit, but they actually cut out a lot of scenes featuring Willie, which, if you think she's annoying, might be for the best. But I think they actually cut out, based on what I read, they cut out some scenes that actually developed her character a little bit.
Yeah, which maybe
because again, this movie was running way over time, so they had to cut out a lot.
Yeah, because they were probably trying to get it to feel as fast as the first one, which is one thing I liked about these movies, is that they were pretty quick-paced and they felt like they went by pretty quickly.
Yeah, that was more of a problem with the third one, but we'll get there when we start talking about the third one.
Apparently, Willie was named after Spielberg's dog.
Yeah.
There was another character in the second one also named after a dog. I think Short Round was named after...
Yeah, Short Round was named after someone's dog.
Someone's dog as well.
Anyway, how they cast Short Round was...
I've heard conflicting stories about this. One site claimed that the kid went to a specific open casting call audition, but the kid said that he wasn't actually ever trying out for Short Round. It was his brother who was going to the casting audition, and he was just tagging along, and while he was there, they asked him to read for it, and then Spielberg saw his reading of it and decided he was the one.
Yeah, that's what I read. Well, I mean, I guess we should also talk about what the concept for this character was. George Lucas wanted a kid in the movie, as he always seems to do. And the idea was originally a 10-year-old girl. And Spielberg was
Princess in the Village.
Spielberg was like, no, we're not having a 10-year-old girl. We're having a 10-year-old boy who's going to be a disciple to Indy.
Yeah, I think because Spielberg was 10-year-old princess girl in the village... George, your ideas, traveling with a 30-year-old man. George, did you really think this through?
And I think Spielberg, or someone, I think it was Spielberg, was inspired by a picture he saw of an Asian American child wearing a baseball cap and baseball shoes. Yeah,
so they gave him the Yankees cap. I also read that apparently they didn't know if they were going to get a kid with a Chinese accent. They thought, the budgeting director thought that they were going to get a kid with an American or British accent, so they budgeted to get an accent coach, but then they ended up getting one who naturally just had the Chinese accent. Apparently he couldn't read, but he could speak English, so I thought that was interesting too. Apparently his screen test with Harrison Ford was improvisation.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't read.
But, I mean, I guess it all worked out. I actually liked Short Round. I thought he was a good addition to the movie.
Yeah, kind of begs the question, what happened to him between Temple and Raiders of the Lost Ark? Because if you
Killed.
didn't know, Raiders of the Lost Ark is technically after Temple of Doom, because...
Yeah, chronologically it's after Temple of Doom.
And the only thing that indicates that at all is the date at the beginning of the movie, and then they just never reference that again.
Yeah, I guess they could have just not made this a prequel, and I don't think it would have ruined anything.
No, probably not. It probably would have fixed Indy not believing in the weird and occult in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Because there's a line at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark where Indy's like, magic, I don't believe in that mumbo jumbo. It was like 2 or 3 years before he'd encountered the cult of Kali.
Yeah, which ripped out people's hearts and magic stones that glow when you bring them together. Good stuff, Indiana. Maybe he blocked it out of his mind. PTSD.
I mean, I guess maybe the justification for why Temple is before Raiders is well, we don't really know what to do with Marion, so we're just going to make this a prequel. But then again, Marion's not even in Crusade.
Yeah, Spielberg wanted to bring back Marion, and I don't remember actually why they didn't bring her back.
I don't know why they didn't bring her back. She comes back in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as Shia LaBeouf's mom.
Solid. Harrison Ford apparently injured himself while he was riding the elephant and had to be flown to America for spinal fusion surgery.
It was actually Harrison Ford's idea to include elephants in the movie.
He probably regrets that after he injured himself. So apparently a lot of the from behind or from a distance shots of Indiana on the elephant are actually shots of his stunt double, who basically apparently looked exactly like Harrison Ford up until 5 feet away. So they shot a lot of those scenes with his stunt double, and then scenes that required Harrison Ford's face, they used Harrison Ford, obviously.
Yeah. The movie's set in India, so all right, great, we're going to film on location in India. Because I don't know who exactly, but several of the important people involved were yeah, we have experience in India. So all right, great, we're going to film in North India. And they started doing that, and the Indian government was like, no, we don't really want you to do this. So we're just going to edit your movie and take out all the parts we don't like, then you can do it. And they're like, I guess we'll just not do it then. So instead they went to Sri Lanka.
Yeah, they also couldn't find a gorge in India that fit their vision for the end of the movie.
So that scene was filmed in the studio. Well, parts of it.
The bridge was filmed across the actual gorge, because apparently they were building a dam. The British were building a dam at the time, so they already had all the infrastructure there to just build a bridge, like a rope bridge for them to use. So that was convenient. Spielberg was like, that was really convenient, They already had all those engineers and roads and everything out there and all that infrastructure, and all we had to do was just go and borrow it. Yeah,
the bridge scene kind of reminded me of the blowing up the bridge from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because they're like, all right, we have one shot to destroy this thing, and they had this complicated method of destroying it that I didn't really even understand. And the sun had to be in the right place, and if they failed, they would have to go through a lot of work to even get the bridge up again. They're like, all right, we have to make this perfect, and apparently they did.
Yeah, so worked out. Apparently the actor who played the leader of the cult, don't remember either the actor or the leader of the cult's name right now.
Mon something, I don't remember.
But apparently, Spielberg and Lucas were like, they really wanted to get an Indian actor to play all the Indian parts. And so they found this guy. He was a big actor in, I guess, Indian movies. And apparently he was working on 12 Indian movies at the same time he was doing Temple of Doom. And they, the production crew on Temple of Doom was really... They were unfamiliar with that and his crazy schedule, so they had to work around his weird schedule to get him to come film Temple.
Freaking Bollywood, just working people to death.
Yeah, he would work apparently 3 or 4 shifts a day on 3 different movies in one day.
India is known for producing the most amount of movies.
Yeah, they pump those things out every couple of days.
Yeah, in the scene where Indy finds the child who escaped. Mm-hmm. Apparently they had 3 local child actors try out for that part, I guess. But then meanwhile, there was just this kid watching from not too far away. So like, hey, do you want to try? And he was like, oh yeah, sure. So he tried, and they're like, wow, you're the best. So it's just some local kid.
Great. Makes sense. He's only got 3 lines in the movie.
They actually gave him those lines because they liked the original part didn't have any lines, but they actually gave him lines because they liked how he played it. which is
Fair.
interesting. Yeah, again, like we said, a lot of the movie was set in the temple, which the movie was kind of bashed for when it came out.
Yeah, the movie got actually a lot of negative press when it came out. So like, wow, this is just a really cynical movie. It has like none of the
That,
charm
and I
of
think a lot of
Raiders.
people didn't like it because it was kind of dissimilar from Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Helped create the PG-13 rating though, because
Yeah.
they were like, man, we really shouldn't slap PG on this when they've got like heart ripping, but also at the same time, it's not like hard R. So
I mean, I don't know. There are some rated R movies from like the early 80s that aren't as violent as this, like Jaws.
oh yeah, in that interview where Spielberg was talking about filming his movies differently, he also talked about how he's only shown one of his kids Jaws. He's like, I gotta gauge when they're mature enough to see Jaws, because if that came out right now, that'd be R.
Wasn't Jaws R?
I think it was PG. I think it was one of those PG
I
movies.
don't know. Well, The Exorcist was PG. But yeah, this contributed to actually was the sole purpose for creating, or the sole
Well, this and
reason.
Gremlins,
Oh,
apparently.
Gremlins isn't that scary. Come on, I've seen Gremlins.
Don't look at me. I'm just repeating what Spielberg said.
I think it was mostly this. But anyway, yeah, it wasn't really well liked.
At the
Didn't have
time.
that Lawrence Kasdan script behind it.
Yeah, it didn't, really.
A lot of the characters were seen as annoying, like Willie, which I agree
Which is
with, and
true.
Short Round, which I can kind of see why people would think he's annoying. I didn't think he was that annoying.
Yeah, he was alright.
And,
So, yeah, it came out, and, I mean, George was still like, we're going to make this third one. We're going to do it. And so, the problem was, they were completely blank on what to do next, because they're like, well, so the Ark of the Covenant was like a real thing. So were the Shankara stones. But, like, what do we do now? What kind of mystical thing can we do now? And
they came up with the Holy Grail.
apparently the Holy Grail was supposedly Lucas's first idea, and Spielberg was like, but it's like, it's too uncertain about whether or not it actually exists or not. And then George came up with these other ideas, and Spielberg was like, you know what, never mind, we'll do the Holy Grail. They had to call in some other guys to write it again.
Yeah, Jeffrey Boehm. He was the one who actually, well, he went to Lucas because they wanted to do something. A lot of the reason why Crusade feels pretty similar to Raiders is because they, after Temple of Doom, they're like, all right, we need to recapture what made people like Raiders.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the scenes and just the feel of that are like directly copied from Raiders. Like the tank scene was supposed to be like a one-up for the truck scene. A lot of it's set in like desert areas, similar to Raiders.
Yeah.
And then like they brought in Indy's dad to have like some more character development for him, whereas in like Raiders it was sort of just the setup, whereas Crusade is like more of the character development things after the setup, which is why Temple of Doom is kind of a weird outlier in the middle where it's also just another random story. But we'll get to that when we get to how it worked as a trilogy.
Yes.
But yeah, another thing that they wanted to recapture from Raiders is the like 10 or 15 minute opener that's sort of a different story that sets up the movie. And Jeffrey Boehm came to George Lucas and he's like, hey, I don't know what to do for this. George Lucas is like, hey, I don't know. I know. Why don't we make Indy a kid? Because I incorporate kids in all my movies.
Well, they did that on the second movie too, with the whole 15-minute intro that feels like a different movie. The whole club scene is completely different than the rest of the movie, even though it's like plot linked.
But that feels a lot more relevant to the actual movie itself, whereas these two kind of like, Crusade, like debatably, but like Raiders, not really.
Yeah. I think Lucas described it, or Spielberg, I don't remember which, described it as it's supposed to feel like the end of another movie leading into this movie.
I guess, yeah, that's true. I agree with that. But it feels a lot more connected to the actual movie itself in Temple because that's how they get stranded in India.
Mm-hmm. But there's clearly another plot line that was resolved in that beginning scene with the diamond and the ashes of the first
obviously.
Empire. And it's like the whole story is like, well, how did Indy find them and all that? So there's clearly like, it's clearly the resolution of another story, even if it is more directly the start of another one.
Yeah.
But yeah, so George was like, make Indiana Jones a kid. And Jeffrey Boehm was like, I guess that'll work. He said something like, after this, there isn't going to be really anything left to do around Indiana. Like, I'm trying really to show us the final side of Indiana as a character, kind of trying to wrap it up.
And like, how do we do that? Well, I guess we're going to incorporate his father.
Yeah, so he was like, yeah, it's kind of like a symbolic thing, like, meeting his father in the movies for the first time, kind of bringing his whole life of adventuring full circle, kind of.
Yeah.
So, Yeah, the
I
Holy
don't know how
Grail.
much that makes sense, but yeah.
Spielberg always wanted Sean Connery as Harrison Ford's dad, but apparently he's not that much older than Harrison Ford.
They did a good job making him a lot of, well, because also Harrison Ford is 10 years older basically at this point, playing a 2-year older
Yeah.
Indy.
Yeah. So, yeah, for the second movie, he was supposed to be 1 year younger than in the first movie, but Harrison Ford was 3 years older than when they filmed the first movie, so he had to go through all this training and physical training to do it. And then he was like, yeah, it's really weird. I'm 4 years older than the character I was playing 3 years ago.
Hey, Harrison Ford's almost 80 and he's still playing Indiana Jones. So good on him, I guess.
I guess he really likes the role. Or
Yeah.
maybe he's just coming back to kill off that character too.
Are they really going to kill off Indy in the fifth one after, now that, never mind.
I think Shia LaBeouf's gone.
And, no,
Gone.
you know what? Whatever. Mentally and physically, just gone. Just almost as if he never existed. No.
Yeah, because the fourth one was setting up like
That Shia LaBeouf was going to be the next.
as the next indie, but everyone was like, wow, Mutt kind of sucks as a character.
And just Shia LaBeouf just going off the deep end. There's that too. But anyway, this isn't 2008 yet. It's actually 1988/9.
Yeah. So apparently the conception of Henry Jones Sr. in the script was completely different to how they had Sean Connery play him. Apparently he was supposed to be like a really crotchety old man type thing. And Sean
Kind of was.
Sean Connery read it and was like, yeah, but where's the magic? Like, how are you supposed to understand that Indiana Jones, this adventurer archaeologist with lust for danger, came from this crotchety old man who like never leaves his apartment?
Yeah, see, I didn't read that, so I didn't hear it until now that you just said it, but that actually makes sense that, like, if his dad wasn't that adventurous, that he would, because he was raised by his dad and the mom died, I guess,
Yeah.
that he would, like, actually want to go on adventures and stuff. That makes more sense to me than what Connery apparently said.
Well, Connery was like, well, you got to show that at least the spirit is there, right? You got to show how that these people are
I think he just
actually
didn't want
related.
to. I think he just didn't want to play a crotchety old man.
That probably too. There's a lot of references to James Bond throughout the making of all these movies because, I mean, they started with Spielberg wanting to direct a Bond movie and Lucas being like, this is better than Bond. So there's a lot of things like, oh, the girls, they're not Bond girls. They're like, they can hold their own and they like to do a lot of things. I would argue that Willie is like the closest to actually being a Bond girl in these movies.
It's also a different, like, lead actress in every movie, so I haven't watched any of the James Bond movies, but I'm pretty sure that's the case for those ones too.
Yeah, it is. And like, yeah, they're not Bond girls, but Willie is for sure the closest.
Well, that doesn't sit well for when we eventually watch James Bond.
Well, she's closest to the archetypal Bond girl. There are obviously ones who break the mold, obviously, and they're the better ones. But yeah, it's also interesting that there's references to Bond because Sean Connery played James Bond for a decade. There wasn't
much interesting about the third one as compared to the first and second.
Yeah, the third one was definitely just a kind of, we're making a third one. This is our story.
It was the first time they shot a lot of the movie in the U.S. I don't think any of Raiders was shot in the U.S. and there was literally, okay, so when they made Temple, they realized that for the end of the movie they needed a wide, like, panning shot of the entire village, and they're like, shoot, we don't have this shot. So what they did was they created a painted backdrop and then, like, shot just a piece of, like, turf at Skywalker Ranch and just, like, imposed it over the backdrop. So technically there is, like, one shot of the U.S. in Temple, but that was it. Crusade was the first one that had a lot of scenes in the U.S.
We also forgot to mention that the minecart chase was also something that was in the first movie that got cut and put in the second movie.
Yep.
It was supposed to be after the Ark melts everyone's faces. Indy and Marion were going to load it on a cart and ride away. Yeah, the third one, other than the fact that Spielberg always wanted Sean Connery and got him, nothing really amazing,
Yeah,
interesting
Harrison
happened.
Ford said he was pretty sad that Indiana Jones was ending.
Must have been pretty happy when they came back to him in 2007, I guess.
I mean, he said, like, I think he always said, like, yeah, I'd be open to playing Indiana Jones again. And then he did, and then after that, he's like, I'd be open to playing it again, and now he is.
Lucas's company was like, we're going to make 5 movies when they were filming Temple, and Lucas was like, you should just hold off on believing that for now.
Harrison Ford actually did play Indiana Jones between Temple and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. He played him in one episode of the TV show.
The
Just
Young
one
Indiana
episode.
Jones Chronicles.
Yeah. Which is what George Lucas decided to do instead of the movies. He's like, we've exhausted what Indiana Jones can do. Got to go back to his beginnings.
No, you haven't, because you haven't used aliens yet.
I have no problem with the introduction of aliens, honestly. I don't know why people throw such a big fit over it.
No, I don't either. I think people's biggest problem, we'll probably end up talking about this next month.
Yeah.
I think people's biggest problem with that movie is Indy getting into a refrigerator and surviving a nuclear blast practically point blank because of that.
I have no problem with that either. I have basically no problems with any of that movie.
Your opinion might change when we watch it again. So
Yeah, maybe. Maybe I haven't watched it since basically when it came out 10 years ago.
Yeah,
But
I'm sure
I guess-
Disney's going to pump out another one soon.
I mean, the next one's apparently coming out in a few years, so I guess we're talking about further Indiana Jones material.
Yeah.
So like we mentioned, there's a TV show. There's the 4th one. We're going to be watching the 4th one for the 0.5 of this. So next month.
Because it's easy.
Yeah. And watching one episode of a TV show just never feels that satisfying.
Except when there's only one episode in existence, like for X-Men.
Yeah, but then when we watched the first episode of the actual X-Men animated series, it just didn't feel that satisfying. Even though I went and watched like 4 more episodes of it, and was planning on watching the whole show, but didn't.
There's been comic books too about Indiana Jones, video games. I own one. Where
Lego one.
No, I own another one where Indiana Jones goes to China to find something. I remember really enjoying it when I was like 12 or 13, but I don't know, maybe it's actually not that good.
Yeah. There's a new one coming out supposedly in 2020.
Supposedly. We'll see if that happens.
With an almost 80-year-old Harrison Ford coming back to play Indiana Jones.
And because Disney loves their de-aging CGI tech, there's probably going to be a scene in there with younger Harrison Ford thanks to CG tech.
Probably. I wonder if they're going to set this one 10 years after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out 19 years after Crusade, and it's set in the Indiana Jones universe 19 years after Crusade.
Yeah,
so
which is why the
interesting.
Nazis don't show up. It's actually the communists.
Yeah.
Because it's like Cold War era.
Shia LaBeouf's not coming back for that one.
Bummer. Shia LaBeouf can actually be a good actor when he puts his mind to it.
Yeah, I guess.
When he puts his mind to it.
I mean, it's pretty well known that a lot of acting comes down to directing. Mm-hmm. You can have an actor who's great in one movie be not that great in another movie just based on the directing.
Yeah, for sure. Spielberg,
Examples of that? I can't think of any right now.
I mean, Shia LaBeouf in Fury was amazing. Shia LaBeouf in Transformers was questionable.
Shia LaBeouf in Holes was good.
So Steven Spielberg's had some duds over the years. I think a lot of people consider Crystal Skull one of his duds, but I don't know.
Yeah, I remember just like I liked the movie when it came out when I was like 12, but then 12-year-old me was like, yeah, that wasn't as good as the other 3 Indiana Jones movies, but I don't know if I really trust 12-year-old me.
Spielberg is like the most famous director in Hollywood working right now anyway.
And probably one of, if not the most famous of all time.
I think people can at least name either Stanley Kubrick or Alfred Hitchcock as well.
Spielberg's definitely one of the most famous.
Yeah. Anyway, how did they work as a trilogy? I think they actually worked pretty well.
I don't think they worked that well. Honestly, I was thinking about this, and I think if you just take out Temple of Doom, Raiders of the Lost Ark and Crusade work actually just better as 2 movies by themselves, just with Temple of Doom being sort of a side story / other thing.
Maybe. I think they work well as a trilogy, though, because Temple is different, and because it's bookended by 2 movies that are pretty similar. You get Indy's story told from basically two different perspectives. And I think that works out pretty well for these movies, in my opinion.
I guess. Then again, as I've mentioned before, I like sequels that are basically just really similar to the original movie, which is why I see Crusade is probably my least favorite, because the tank battle is just drawn out. And I guess that's another minus on how they worked as a trilogy, because, the first two had that like 10-minute cliffhanger structure, and they were pretty fast-paced. They didn't really feel that long. Crusade did feel very long. Didn't feel, I don't know whether they paced it with the 10-minute cliffhanger thing or whatever, but it didn't feel like they did. And the tank battle at the end, which was supposed to replicate the truck stuff from the first one, I just felt that scene was completely drawn out unnecessarily and just felt way too long. Coming at the end of the trilogy just really detracted how they work as a trilogy, in my opinion. It's like, all right, just let this movie be over already.
I don't know, I feel like up until that point and after that scene too, that movie is paced pretty well. I feel like it's just that scene that's the problem in that movie.
Yeah, if that scene was cut by half, then I wouldn't really have a problem with like the final 30 minutes of that movie. But it wasn't cut in half, so I did.
I forgot to mention that like the plane scene in the first movie was apparently a lot of like improvisation for the fight scene. They just kind of went out there and saw the plane, and they just started coming up with ideas on the spot about how the fight scene was going to go down.
You mean in the third one?
No, in the first one, the plane, when they're fighting on the plane.
Oh, yeah, all right.
So I thought that was pretty interesting. Apparently Steven Spielberg can't draw for garbage, so he like draws his storyboard panels with like stick figures and stuff, and then hands them off to professional artists to envision what he scribbled down. But yeah, I don't know. I really like this trilogy. Temple is probably my least favorite, just because Raiders is my favorite. I like Sean Connery in the third one, which kind of puts the third one over the second one for me, because I really like the father-son dynamic that they introduced in the third one. I think it's a lot of fun, and I really enjoy it. But I mean, I like all three of them. I think they're all really good movies.
I think they're all really good. I've always liked Temple of Doom. Like as a kid, it was just the one I watched first and the one I watched like multiple times. Going back to this, I kind of see Raiders as it's equal almost, but I just like the setting in Temple of Doom a lot more. Just the jungle and the temple is really cool, in my opinion. So I like it more than the desert setting. So
that's fair. Desert's not thrillingly interesting.
No, it's more just rocks and sand everywhere.
Apparently they had to cut some slapstick moments from the first one because they thought they didn't fit the tone. Like they apparently had a scene where Indy and Marion emerge from the Well of Souls, and there's like two diggers nearby, and they watch these two people just come out of this tomb and they faint. They were like, that's a bit too slapstick for this movie.
There's a lot of weird like tonally different things in Temple of Doom, because like that's a pretty dark movie, it has the human sacrifice and the cult or whatever, and then at the same time you get the scenes where like a hammer goes flying off and there's a cartoon bonk sound on someone's head and they just drop on the floor. I was like, all right, it's okay. Kind of weird.
Yeah, because I think they were trying to keep some parts of it a little light-hearted, maybe.
Yeah, got to keep catering to the kids who like the first one, but also got to include this satanic cult.
Yeah, satanic cults for kids. Oh, boy. Yeah, Indiana Jones is like a cultural cornerstone icon.
Yeah, good trilogy.
So, and now it's out of the way for us, which means we're running out of those good 80s trilogies to do. Anyway, you can email us at thedoctor@decorativevegetable.com. Your questions, comments, concerns, anchorments, love letters, your opinions on Indiana Jones.
Is Temple of Doom really as bad as people originally said it was? I don't think so, but do you?
You can find us on YouTube at Decorative Vegetable. Remember that we consolidated all of our YouTube stuff into one channel. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and Google Play at Triple Play. Be sure to leave a rating if you like the show.
Check us out on Facebook. Trust your doctor. Like us on Facebook. Also check us out on Twitter at TYD Podcast and follow us on Twitter. And next month we're watching Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But then when we move on to a new trilogy, the month after that, we're going to be watching the Oceans trilogy. But until then, the end.